Well, hello, friends. Good to be with you today as we start in on our second of our Women of the Bible adult education series. We're going to be talking today about Ruth. And so, when we're looking at Ruth, we actually have a full book of the Bible, not just two chapters like we had for Deborah. We have a full book to look at the entirety of the arc of her story, and while it's only 4 chapters, it still is more substantial. We get more detail about who Ruth is and what she does. Unlike Deborah, we have sort of a couple little spots here. So if we are looking for the book of Ruth, it is right after the book of Judges, right before 1 Samuel. And it's placed there because chronologically, the book of Ruth happens during the time of the Judges. And it's probably about 50 years or so before we move into the events that are depicted in 1 Samuel. So today we're going to end up looking at Ruth, talking about what she did. And as we do that, I want us to start off by listening to the first chapter. So we're going to look at the entirety of chapter 1 to start with, and then I'm going to ask you guys to be thinking about what are items, details, events that stand out to you, and we'll end up talking about those in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to be reading from the New Revised Standard Version, and welcome to the folks joining us on 966. Starting in verse 1 of chapter 1, I'm going to read the entire chapter. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went to the hill country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. When they had lived there for about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons or her husband. Then she started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab. For she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had had consideration for his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with me, with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find security, each of you in the household of your husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. They said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they were grown? Would you then refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, it has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me." Then they wept aloud again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. So the 2 of them went until they came to the city of Bethlehem. When they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred up because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? She said to them, call me no longer Naomi, but call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? So Naomi returned together with Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, who came back with her from the country of Moab. They came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. So as you're listening to that, what are things that stand out to you? The family did not what? The family didn't have to be blood related. Yeah, so that these daughters-in-law found a whole lot of connection with Naomi, and they really, valued her. I mean, they'd been with her for like 10 years or something like that. What else? The King James is much more poetic. Entreat me not to leave thee. Yes, it is definitely more poetic. And sometimes it can be harder to understand. What are they saying with thus and they and the, yeah. What else? Right. Yeah. Any protection. Yeah. Right. 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 I mean, so there's a deep sense of despair from Naomi that don't call me Naomi, which means delightful or pleasurable. Instead, call me Mara, which means bitter. And so she's doing a play on her name. Don't call me happy, delightful, wonderful. Call me bitter, which is exactly what I am. So there are a couple other things about the names that become interesting. So if you were able to peel back things and look at what the Hebrew says, when you talk about where they came from, Bethlehem, in Hebrew you'd say Bethlehem. It means house, beit, lachem, bread. So Bethlehem is the house of bread. And what's happening? It's a famine. So they leave the house of bread and go to Moab. And if you had been following along a little bit earlier in Judges, you would know the Moabites, boo, no, yuck. They were some of the folks that they're in battle with, and they're one of the few peoples that are treated in Genesis by Moses to say, you shall not accept the Moabites. They are backwards, incestuous, avoid them. So here are folks that are leaving the house of bread and going to Moab because it's supposedly better, but Moab has all these bad connotations to it. Yes, Ruth is a Moabite. Ruth is from Moab. She was not part of the people of Israel. It wasn't that they brought, they sent people back to bring wives for the two sons from the people of Israel. Nope, they got locals. And here's the other thing. Those two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, if you say those names in Hebrew, it sounds close to Mahlon, diseased, Chilion, pestilence. So there's these words in there that's sort of like, okay, we're getting some indication that this may not be exactly the best family to be in. Go ahead. Yeah. Now, you can get into, and we'll talk about this towards the end, but you can get into a whole bunch of arguments between biblical scholars saying, well, this was really just written as a telling story. It's sort of like Jonah, that, the folks who look at Jonah and also Job, they're sort of like, these were stories that were told. This wasn't understood as a history. And so folks are on both sides about, is this a history or is this a story that's told for a purpose? So if it is that story, then the author, the people who put this together, knew exactly what they were doing and saying that they came from Bethlehem, that, Malon and Chilion, they knew some of this stuff would end up hitting the first hearers in a certain way. Do we know anything about Ruth's husband? So I don't know which one was which, whether it was Malon or Chilion. It doesn't really tell us, and according to the way that the story is told, it really doesn't matter. Also, one other thing, just a total side note that is of no relevance to Bible study. Did you notice the name of the other woman who married the son? Orpah? Yeah. Oprah was named after Orpah, but they switched the first two letters, or the second and third letter. So Oprah got her name from Orpah in this story. Uh-huh. Yeah, unfortunately, when we're talking about Hebrew, it has a totally different meaning. But yeah, there is that feeling. And so one of the things that really shows up in this story is the idea of who is being faithful. Who is faithful in this story? I mean, it's very clearly Ruth. Ruth is the one who's being faithful, devoted, that daughter-in-law par excellence. I mean, wouldn't you want to have a daughter-in-law like that? That's sort of like, I'm staying with you no matter what. Even though you've told me go home 3 times, I'm still going with you. Yeah. It's interesting that they didn't have any children. And so so if we're having that idea that, Malon is diseased and Chilion is perishing, there's sort of that, idea there. But if these folks were good Israelites, followers of Jesus, not Jesus, followers of Moses, if they were experiencing famine, would they really have upped and moved to another country? Or would they have stayed put, trusting that God is going to provide for them at the house of bread? And so when we think about this, it's really ironic that Elimelech, Naomi, Malon, and Chilion are up and moving at the first sign of distress, going to an enemy country. I mean, it would be like us saying, okay, we have a famine, we're moving to Russia. Right. Yeah, and so there is that concern about children, absolutely, if they're really thinking. But there's still that part that if you believed that God was faithful, you would have stayed put. Additionally, they moved to Moab and stay there for, a decade. And the sons marry local women, which in Hebrew custom means that any kids that they have would not be Jewish. That your mother has to be Jewish in order for you to be Jewish. But, the patriarchy runs through the father's side. And then we have, of course, Ruth saying, or Naomi saying, okay, things are better back home. I'm going back home. And she goes, and the two daughter-in-laws, come along with her. And then partway there, she says, you know what? Why are you doing this? There's nothing there for you. I appreciate your loyalty, but go back to your, home of your parents and have them find new husbands for you. Because I don't have any more kids, because the tradition would have been that, if a son dies without kids, then it's the brother's responsibility to impregnate the woman so that the line continues. But Ruth clearly says, I'm not going. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going with you. And so here is that devotion, that sense that I am committed, when folks who supposedly know God and God's commitment aren't the same way. So we've already done what are some things that stood out to you? And so I'm going to breeze through chapter 2 right now. So what ends up happening is they get back to Bethlehem, and Ruth goes, and Naomi sends her out to do something called gleaning. That's where, the harvesters have come through and some grain falls, and they end up going and picking up the discards. And they also are told to leave the corners of your fields for those folks that are gleaning, so that poor people can find something to eat. And so she goes to a field that's owned by a man named Boaz. And Boaz is related to Elimelech. We don't know exactly how, but it's sort of a cousin-ish relationship is what we find out eventually. And while she's there, she gathers the grain that falls on the ground, and Ruth actually catches Boaz's eye. Boaz is there, and he talks to the men that are out there, cutting down the grain, and he says, hey, who's that? And they end up saying, well, Boaz says, I've told them to protect you and make sure that you're okay, and why don't you come have lunch with me right now? So Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to Ruth, my daughter, I need to seek out some security for you so that it may be well with you. Now here is our kinsman Boaz, with whose young women you have been working. See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Now wash and anoint yourself and put on your best. Came quietly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and there, lying at his feet, was a woman. He said, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your cloak over your servant, for you are next of kin. He said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. This last instance of your loyalty is better than the first. You have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not be afraid, for I will do for you all that you ask. For all the assembly of my people know that you are a worthy woman. But now, though it is true that I am a near kinsman, there is another kinsman more closely related than I. Remain this night, and in the morning, if he will act as next of kin for you, good, let him do so. If he is not willing to act as next of kin for you, then as the Lord lives, I will act as next of kin for you. Lie down until the morning. So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before one person could recognize another. For he said, it must not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Then he said, bring the cloak you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it out, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her back. But we'll settle the matter today. What are your first thoughts? What do you hear in that? What things stand out? Obedience. Yep, so Ruth is obedient to both Naomi and to Boaz. What else? This is not 2024. No, it's a very different age, very different world. Yeah. Yeah. So there is that recognition that Naomi is trying to protect Ruth by finding her someone that can help, someone that can, protect her. But there's also a part where Ruth is working to protect Naomi. I mean, she's understanding that, if I get this protection, if I get this person who's going to be that, kinsman that has the right to redeem property, then we're going to be all set. And so, right, she can take care of Naomi because they've had this time together where, they're a package deal now. Right. I mean, this is not a small amount of grain. I mean, 6 measures would be enough to make 6 to 12, loaves of bread. And so this is a significant amount for folks that don't have, anything there, anything harvested, anything. We don't know that. It could be, it could not. We don't know. The story doesn't tell us. There's a whole heck of a lot of euphemisms here, and that was something that I was going to be talking about because, the yeah, exactly. So this does have that this does have that possibility that there is sexual euphemism going on here. There's also the understanding that the threshing floor is not the place that a woman of good repute would go. That the threshing floor was often a place where sex for hire was available because it was sort of outside the city. It was something that happened during the night. And so someone going out there in the middle of the night, a woman was saying, okay, I'm willing to get paid for sex. Yes. So we hear, so when he says, you can't be seen here, leave before it gets, bright enough for folks to see your face, he's protecting her reputation. Because he already has heard the stories about how she's come back from Moab, how she has come back following Naomi and showing this love and care. And Naomi. And so